On this episode of Fired Up.
There's a prosecutor in the mix, and the prosecutor thinks that the correct answer here was call 911 first. Then maybe defend your life if you actually need to once that's happened.
Well, that's the point. I mean, he's in their house at 2 in the morning.
Well, what's the problem with the prosecution, Randy?
The problem is if the only factor that this guy is citing for prosecuting this guy for murder is because he didn't call 911 is absurd.
Today we're going to do a very iconic firearm that is probably the most recognizable gun in the world, the AK-47.
Thanks for tuning in to Fired Up. I'm Bob Irwin, your host for the show, coming to you from the gun store in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. This show is about guns, politics, and self-defense. Our panel discussions on this episode, we're going to talk about a man who is charged with murder allegedly because he failed to call 911 before he took action to defend himself. It seems every week I'm saying this is a story I really couldn't make up, but here we are again with another one of these. Our second piece is going to be on the question of jury nullification. We have some things in the Constitution that say the juries are the ultimate decider of what's right and wrong in the United States, and some of that has been weakened a lot here. Thirdly, we're going to try and address the new problem of what is called the pick 'em out and knock 'em out game that seems being played in some neighborhoods, where defenseless, usually elderly people are attacked, and the thugs want to see if they can knock them out with one punch. We've had some people killed over this, and what can possibly be done about it by ordinary people to defend themselves from that type of thing. This first story, however, is we have basically this, a continuing argument between a husband and wife over the wife's male friend. Her male friend broke into the house, the couple's home, at 2 a.m., got aggressive when he was ordered out of the house, and the husband shot him.
It sounds like a clean shoot on its face to me, listening to the facts, but unfortunately, as occasionally happens in these, there's a prosecutor in the mix, and the prosecutor thinks that the correct answer here was call 911 first. Then maybe defend your life if you actually need to once that's happened, because the police were apparently sitting on the doorstep waiting for the 911 call to come in and save his life.
They're so good like that, aren't they?
Right? Because Randy used to do that, drive around waiting for the 911 calls. We were always in the neighborhood, right?
Always.
Well, there seems to be a little bit more to the story. Yes. The husband is in the Air Force and seems to think that this friend was having an affair with his wife while he was away stationed in Korea. So there might have been some bad blood there, if you're thinking this lady's going.
So they've at least met.
They've met. They share a mutual acquaintance. We'll call it that.
Yeah, but I mean, even if that is the case, even if the woman was having an affair with this guy, he's still there at 2 a.m. He still committed the crime of coming into the home where an individual has a right and a responsibility to protect themselves and their family. So the idea of having to put the guy on hold while you call 911 is absurd on its face. And then you get to what the threat level was, and then you're he said, she said. So we don't really know. The suspect was not armed, from the facts that I read, right. But he was aggressive, coming towards the husband.
Well, I'm just going to say that any shooting that occurs in Maryland is going to be iffy. Okay, and secondly, a prosecutor gets a hold of this, and he's going to look at it, and it's his job to look at it from the standpoint of, prosecuting the person who did the shooting and could have called 911 but didn't, and then we've got the complication of the prior feud going on. So I don't think there's any question that there's a legitimate argument, although I'm defending most of the time, and I would say this is a good shoot. I could prosecute this case because of the feud, the prior
well, because they knew each other and they'd they'd accused each other of things and yelled back and forth over a time period. But yet the friend shows up at 2 a.m. He pushes his way through the screen door and is coming across the living room according to the description. And as the homeowners tell him to get out of the house and so forth, he reached toward his back pocket. And
the old back pocket
The
reach.
back pocket trick.
Yeah.
that's when he got shot.
Well, and of course, we've never ever seen a crime where a alleged lover of one of the spouses comes over and attacks the other one at 2 in the morning. He was there for hot toddies.
Well, that's the point. I mean, he's in their house at 2 in the morning. I mean, it's
Obviously, and Alan's right. All of those facts factor in to whether or not a prosecutor says, okay, let's look at this a little deeper. Did he lure the guy over there? Is there phone records? What does the physical evidence say? Was the body moved? But he should have called 911 first, and because he didn't, I think he should be charged with a crime.
Where did that?
that's the prosecutor's argument.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is that?
That's
I mean,
the
that
He
That's
is,
shot
said.
the guy who's porking his wife. That's the argument.
The simple answer, though, is you don't go out and
take
say.
the sexual relationship out of this. If this guy had not been nailing his wife, would we be having this conversation right now?
Wait,
Probably not.
Probably
Probably
not.
not,
But
no.
leave it in there.
Haven't you
and
been in
that
love?
that is motivation for him to come over and attack. The other side of that is every one of us has heard of and or seen a situation where an individual without a weapon caused grievous bodily injury and in some cases death to a person. So whether he's armed or not, especially not breaking into their house.
if the only argument that the prosecutor is using in this case is the guy didn't call 911, then there is no case.
Oh, I'm sure that it's more than that, but he was dumb enough. I apologize for calling you dumb if you're watching this, but he was dumb enough to say it. Because, you know, it's one thing to say things like, well, there were options. Perhaps he could have called 911. Perhaps he could have left the building. I mean, the old retreat thing. Perhaps they could have talked it out or
Last
hugged
thing
it
he
out.
wants to do is
But,
leave this guy alone in the
you
house
know,
with his wife.
his actual quote, what he actually said was that when Pinkerton grabbed his gun, it was bizarre behavior in and of itself. Well, what's odd about grabbing a gun at 2 in the morning when somebody kicks in the door?
Okay, many prosecutors, it's their first job at a law school, and they cut their teeth on working for $25,000 a year, and they have a decision-making process. But isn't there an experienced prosecutor that oversees these decision-making processes and says, you know, this isn't a good prosecution here? So it sounds to me like there's a failure in this prosecutor's office that goes beyond just one individual.
Well, what's the problem with the prosecution, Randy? What is the problem with it?
The problem is if the only factor that this guy is citing for prosecuting this guy for murder is because he didn't call 911 is absurd.
Well, I don't think that's the only thing he's going to argue.
But that's
No,
what we're citing here.
But that's the one thing that jumped out at me in all the things that were said during the various court appearances and that the media picked up on. I'm with Alan. Clearly there's more to this, and I think you're right. Somebody in this office has looked at this and said, there is got to be some fire under all this smoke. There's too much going on here for it to be called clean. But let's be realistic. If this had been a jurisdiction with a long and strong self-defense history or good, strong home defense laws or gun laws, would he be facing the same prosecution? Maybe, but probably not.
Well, the only other one that looked at it was the judge, the district judge at the guy's bond hearing. The prosecutor was holding him on $1.5 million bail on first-degree murder, and the judge reduced it to $250,000. Which pretty well indicates where the judge is going on this, with a murder case, and you're going to drop it.
Well, there shouldn't be a numerical correlation between the severity of the crime anyway. I mean, if the guy was a flight risk or such as that's probably more what was taken into consideration.
It just doesn't make sense to me at all that this would be prosecuted. I mean, he heard the guy banging on the door, didn't know who it was. He put his Glock 17 in his back pocket.
Well, Bob, did the shooter know that the guy that came in the door was his wife's lover? Did he know that?
He had accused the guy of that.
Previously?
Yes.
So he knew it?
He spent a lot of time with the guy's wife while the guy was in Korea. The wife said there was nothing going on between them.
There's
But-
nothing about that fact pattern, Alan. You're just rabble rousing.
No,
now.
no,
You
no,
know
no.
that even though they know each other
The
and there's
man-
that history.
Man's coming into my house, 2:00. He's been my wife. I'm shooting.
He just censored himself. I like it.
Yeah.
He's been.
Here's
not
the
like-
question I have. Here's the question I have, Bob. I
That's
didn't have a
not the
chance to
point.
look into
Well-
it. When
Point is,
will-
nobody have sex with your wife. Clearly, that's the point of the story.
When
Somebody's
will
gotta
a
do it.
jury get a chance to decide whether or not the state is right or the defense is right in this case?
Well, they will get the chance to decide that because with all of the arguing we're going back and forth about whether he should be prosecuted, he's got a trial set for February 11th next year. He's going on trial
We should
for murder.
revisit
This will
Yeah.
be, because if this trial goes weird in some format, we're going to be back here talking about whether they were right or wrong. I predict that this is going to have
But
more
we'll
twists.
also
in
have
it.
a lot more of the fact pattern.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. And so we'll wait till February and we'll readdress this
To be
when
continued.
we know what the jury did with this, and I'm betting they're going to throw it out before anybody opens their mouth in this courtroom. We'll be right back after these few messages. Don't go away.
More discussion on guns, politics, and self-defense when we come back on Fired Up.
Hey, we are back here on Fired Up. One of the subjects that comes up constantly now is in cases like the previous case we were just talking about, where there's a bad set of facts and the jury may consider that this was a different case of the wife being unfaithful and so forth, therefore the guy deserved to get shot or so forth. It's the subject of jury nullification. When the jury looks at a set of facts and just decides that it isn't fair to convict or not convict the individual, and they decide on their own to just basically ignore the facts that are presented in the case and go the other way. And it's called jury nullification. It's been with us for a long time in the United States, and we're starting to see more and more of it as the nation gets more politically divided.
You know, the history of jury nullification in this country goes back to the days of the Founding Fathers, who set up a system whereby the jury would have the power over the judges and the prosecutors in deciding what the facts are. And that's why we call juries the triers of fact. Judges decide what the laws are. Alan and I go in there and try to convince a jury of what happened or didn't happen. But ultimately, when they go back into that room, no one's allowed in there with them because they have the power. And it was to keep bad things from happening in political prosecutions and other prosecutions.
Keeps the government in check, basically.
So when the jury feels that the case is wrong or unfair, they basically have the chance to nullify the prosecution's case by just deciding that the defendant is not guilty of a crime regardless of any other factors.
Correct.
They're just going to be like, no, we don't care what you guys have said. We're just going to go in here and hang out and say no.
That's essentially it in a nutshell. The law is unfair or unconstitutional. We don't care that all of the elements were there. We're going to come back and say not guilty.
And actually, one juror can do that. One juror can actually hang the jury, and even though there's a majority, that doesn't really enter into the mix. So, one dissident on the jury, that can be the deciding factor.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Randy, it's a little more complicated than that. And first of all, I mean, the whole idea of jury nullification in Nevada is pretty much a moot issue because we don't allow instructions to a jury which will give them the opportunity to ignore the law. In fact, they are given quite a strict series of instructions that they are bound to follow the law, apply the facts to the law, and that's what they are instructed to do. And if I or any other attorney stand up and ask them to disregard the law, then there's going to be hell to pay.
There will be consequences for the attorney, consequences for everybody involved. In Nevada, where we are right now, if a jury itself decides, or one individual on the jury, as you mentioned, decides that jury nullification is available to them, they've done the research, they've heard the words or read the books or whatever, there's nothing we can do once they go back in that room. And I know I've had it, I'm sure Alan's had it, where juries come out and 11 people want to string one person up because they just won't go along with the group. Quite often we'll go down after the trial and talk to these individuals. Well, why did you do what you did? What did you believe? You know, we're trying to learn as we're going, but also we want to know really what happened. I've had a few where the person has come out and simply said, you know, I just think it's a crazy law and I don't think it's appropriate, and so I'm never going to vote to convict somebody. And that was a form of jury nullification. Some states allow it. Some states, you can walk right in there and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you don't like the law, you can come back and find my client not guilty because the law itself is unsound. It was a tactic that was used a lot during prosecutions in the 50s and 60s, racially motivated cases, but it was used in a way that people who probably really were guilty walked away because the victims were African Americans. The federal government stepped in, re-prosecuted those people under civil rights violations, and almost always got convictions at that point. But ultimately, it's the jury that decides. And
Is there, now, maybe this is a stupid question. I'm not on the other side of the courtroom, luckily, and I've also never been on jury duty, so I don't actually know how this works out. If the jury does, you know, if there is a hung jury or jury nullification, is there any dismissal, or like once they're in and they're set, like that's it, you can't go and fix it, you can't kick them off, you can't get a new jury, you're just set with whatever they do? Like, how far into the process could you boot people to get a better, like, or more fair result? I don't actually know.
Well, I'm not sure I understand all of your question, but if just a limited portion of your question, once that jury makes its decision, it's done.
No, I mean when you decide on who the jurors are.
okay, so at the beginning of a trial, we have a thing called voir dire where we ask them a bunch of questions to find out if they're the kind of person we want sitting there judging the client, or the prosecutor judging the law and holding the client accountable. The judge sits up there and gives a bunch of instructions about the things that juries are required to do. And then we ask them seriously in-depth questions in order to get kind of a feel for what they might do. If there's any misconduct during the course of the trial, and I've heard of situations where jurors are told you can't talk. You can't talk about the case, you can't talk to you know, you can talk about the weather, but you can't talk about what you're doing here. And I've had jurors kicked off of juries because they couldn't follow that direction. There's always alternates, and they just slide an alternate in there. If you run out of alternates, then you got a problem, you got a mistrial, you got to start all over again. But once they walk back into that room, short of committing a crime back there, I suppose that would do it. But if a juror goes back there and says, you know what, guys, I think we have the right as the jury to say this is unfair and he's not guilty, they might be able to send a note out to the judge and say, oh, there's a guy out here refusing to follow the law, but I don't know they could kick him off the jury, because once they're back there, it's theirs.
And that's why we're here in the United States. I mean, jury nullification is built into the system. There's a quote from John Adams that said, "It is not only the juror's right, but his duty to find the verdict according to his own best understanding, judgment, and conscience, though in direct opposition to the instruction of the court."
That's a pretty.
Thomas
Try to get that
Jefferson.
instruction given to a jury, though.
Well, but Thomas Jefferson said the same thing. "I consider trial by jury as the only anchor yet imagined by man by which a government can be held to the principles of its Constitution." And that's exactly why it's in the Constitution. That if the law gets so out of hand, the juries across the country are the ones who decide what's right and what's wrong. And when we have judges instructing jurors because of something in Nevada law that says, you can't consider that, you can only consider this, it's a violation of what this country was founded upon, which is the jury being the ultimate decider if the government is right or wrong.
All right, so in my trial coming up in January, I'm going to ask Judge to instruct the jury pursuant to what Bob read.
I think you should actually put this in.
I'm going to ask Bob to instruct
put it
the
in
jury.
as a proposed jury instruction. It'll be denied.
It'll be
an
denied.
appellate issue.
Yep.
That's the answer. Because what's happened is the government has changed. We've changed a bunch of things since the days these things were said and written down. I agree with them completely. What's happened isn't that Nevada law says jury nullification is illegal or can't happen. We're just not allowed to put it out in front of the jury for fear of swaying them. But if they go back in that
But
room
I
and do it
am. So if you're listening to this story and you're going to be on a jury, Thomas Jefferson said, and
I'm
this is
telling you,
basically
it's our duty
America.
to push this as defense counsel, to push that issue, to push the envelope, to try to make that change, so that in Nevada we can give an instruction.
To try
That's
to make
our
the
duty
change
to try to.
back
Yes.
where it's supposed to be.
And
But
that is how
don't
it
you
works.
see the possibilities that we could go back to a situation like in the 50s and 60s where because of political motivation or racial discrimination, then this right that you're talking about that a jury has can be used for evil.
It could be, like a plastic gun could be, but
Oh.
we're dealing
About
with
evil.
something
Plastic gun.
different here.
But I think Randy does have a point. There is a certain stability that comes from disallowing a jury to run off and judge the law, contrary to its own, words.
How else?
There is a risk that can happen.
There's a risk, but
I think it ever so slight, and I do think the benefit of instructing the jury pursuant to what you read, it outweighs the risk of some sort of jury anarchy happening across the nation.
we've all seen laws that we look at and we disagree with, that the guilt by association. We know this guy's a gangbanger, so he's going to get an extra 30 years because we know he has a tattoo from a gang. That's got to be unconstitutional. There's no proving he committed a crime. He's just got the tattoo that he shouldn't have. In whose opinion? I mean, that may be a bad example, but
That's a really bad example.
we've got to let juries be the ultimate arbitrator of whether the government is right or wrong, or we're handing them our freedom.
Well said.
And I didn't even have to read that. Now that we've exhausted that, we're going to be back a little bit with one more segment. Don't go away.
We'll have more Fired Up when we come back.
Today we're going to do a very iconic firearm that is probably the most recognizable gun in the world, the AK-47.
Hey, we're back here on Fired Up with Bob. We're at Pro Gun Club for the Firearms Fair sponsored by Surefire Institute, and I'm here with Troy Arce, the chief instructor for the Surefire Institute here at the Firearms Fair. What kinds of things can the viewers expect when they come out here and take a class with you?
Well, we offer world-class firearms instruction. We have instructors from all over the world that teach tactical firearms training, tactical medicine, and different types of disciplines. We offer training to the military and law enforcement. Our bread and butter is the low light operator course, which we teach to several law enforcement agencies across the nation.
Now, do you teach that to civilians as well? Because one of the things we're always talking about on the show is being prepared to defend yourself and your loved ones. And as you know, the vast majority of self-defense shootings in the home happen after dark at night in a darkened house. So can a civilian come out and take that course?
Absolutely. You know, we like to get everybody involved, every responsible gun owner and all the gun vendors here, to get together and work as a community. And I think self-defense is it's a huge issue. We live in a perilous society, and we want to make sure we get that education out to as many as we can.
That is great. I have one of the questions a lot of my clients call me and ask is, I want to take one of these classes at one of the big schools, but I'm not really a very good shooter. I mean, I know how to load my firearm, I know how to shoot safely, but I'm not like one of these military or law enforcement kind of guys. Can any skill level shooter come out and take a class and gain something from it?
Absolutely. We take children, anybody that's never handled a firearm, we can take them from taking it right out of the box, from basic, taking it apart, cleaning it, fundamental training, all the gun handling, marksmanship, and we base it off of mental conditioning as well, and teaching people the right skill sets and the right mindset to handle themselves in a lethal confrontation.
Now, I would presume that you teach in segments, so basic firearms might be one segment, and then low light might be a segment, that sort of thing. And well, this is a great opportunity you have. Come out here and see Troy and his team of instructors. Get those skills that you might need to save your life. Troy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much for coming out. Appreciate it.
Okay, here we are at the Firearms Fair at Pro Gun Club, and we have a very unique product here. It's the Hilsaback dual rate buffer spring. And this is Dan Helseback, the owner and operator of the company, and he's going to fill you in a little bit. How you doing, Dan?
Tony. Thank you very much for coming by here. We're promoting the dual rate buffer spring today. We titled the product Flatline. It's a patent pending spring system for the AR-15 carbine length buffer tube system. It's a dual rate system eliminating muzzle rise and muzzle flip at the front of the barrel. We're able to run full auto machine guns, running it on open palm without having the barrel jump off your hand at all. I'm going to demonstrate here the product, how we would install the rifle. It's a 3-part system. We have a short buffer spring that will go in the very back. You're going to follow it up by a hollow spacer. Then you're going to follow it up with our main operating spring, reusing whatever factory buffer you have in the gun all the way up to an H2 buffer. We're eliminating virtually all of the muzzle lift at the front of the gun, virtually all of the sideways muzzle flip on the front. We're reducing about 10% of the recoil at the buttstock of the gun. Product was intentionally designed specific to the .223 caliber round, 5.56 chambered for these guns. It'll work with M4 series AR-15 style rifles. Hopefully soon in the future we're going to be unveiling them for the AK and the AR-10 variants as well.
You're going to do, you said you're also working on a full length buffer too, right?
We're also looking on a rifle length buffer tube as well for this product.
Okay. We picked up a couple of units and we're actually running them at the gun store right now, a little beta test to see how they go.
Very good.
So far my phone hasn't rung, so apparently they're working pretty good.
Very good.
All right, Dan, good luck.
Hey, thank you very much for coming by today. Appreciate it.
Hi, we're back here on Fired Up with Bob. We're out at Pro Gun Club for the Firearms Fair presented by Surefire Institute. I'm here with Hans Vang, the CEO and co-founder of Vangkop. They build tactical shotguns, and we're going to break a little bit of news here. They are now in a collaborative partnership with Surefire Institute, so they're going to be bringing even better products and training for you. Hans, why don't you tell us a little bit about why your shotgun should be in everybody's gun safe?
Well, I think the biggest thing is with a shotgun is called reliability. Also accuracy. We make a barrel that we take your barrel and modify it by backboring the barrel, lengthening the forcing cone, and putting a series of holes in it. What you get for that is you get a 10 to 12 inch group at 25 to 35 yards. You get a reduction in recoil by 10 to 15%, and the nighttime muzzle flash is reduced by at least 50%.
So now you're building this on my gun, so if I bring you an 870 or a 500, you can build on either of those
Sure, no
models?
problem at all. No problem.
Is there a specific model that is better?
We actually have 3 models we probably use. The 500 Mossberg, the 590, 590A1, the 870, and also the 870P. We do the Expresses and the Police Magnums on those.
Now I notice on the shotgun you're holding, you have a ghost ring sight, and I think it's a night sight Trijicon front blade on that.
Correct. That's actually an XS small dot tritium. The front sights we put on our shotguns are very similar to the AR style sight. So if you're familiar with those, you got elevation in there. So when the tritium goes dead, it's not when it's going to go dead, when it will definitely go dead. It's just screw in, screw out, and it's very unique here. The rear sight, if you notice, it's all made out of one piece of aluminum. A lot of guys will make this one piece, that one piece. We decided when I designed the stuff to do it this way. Structurally and cosmetically it works better. The other thing that's really critically important, you see this gun has a 2-shot tube extension in it. Everybody else in the industry makes them out of 3 or 4 pieces of metal. This starts out weighing 2 pounds. We get done, it weighs 10 ounces.
Wow.
It's made out of solid bar stock. Another little trick item we do is make a nice little dome-headed safety.
Nice.
Yeah, that works out really great. Especially if you have gloves on, you can feel it. It really works great. The other one may be a little hard to see here is we have a stainless steel magazine fouler. It's got little grooves around the outside, stainless steel. It doesn't get affected by dirt, debris, and crud in the gun base.
And I see you have an overmold on the forestock.
Oh, yes.
Slip-free there.
Oh yeah, very much so. These are our favorite guys in the world, Hogue Industries. They've been making stuff for over 30, 35 years. Family-owned business, made in America. We love Hogue products.
Well, as you know, Tony likes the 870 Sledge-O-Matic, as he likes to call it. It slices, it dices for home defense and for self-defense. And you should look into a home defense or personal defense shotgun too. Talk to the guys over here at Vangkop. They will build you the absolute best tactical shotgun, and you need to have something like that in your arsenal.
Hi, this is Tony with the Gun Store in Las Vegas. Thanks for watching Fired Up with Bob. Today we're going to do a very iconic firearm that is probably the most recognizable gun in the world, the AK-47. was developed by Mikhail Kalashnikov in 1947. He was a Russian designer, and this gun started off as a milled steel one. This one is a milled steel one. And then later on in production, they went to a sheet metal one to, of course, save cost and time. This gun has been used by the Russians. It was copied by the Chinese. It was used, made in Bulgaria, Egypt, Romania, Hungary. Virtually every communist bloc country in the world uses this gun. You see it every day on television. In Iraq, in Afghanistan, all the insurgents are armed with the AK. In Africa, during the Rhodesian War, all the insurgents were armed with AKs. This is so recognizable, this gun, it's even on the flag of the country of Mozambique. So if you recognize the curved magazine, it's a significantly crude weapon. It's very, very tolerable to dirt, which is good because a lot of the third world nations that utilize this gun, the people who actually use it, are not very high on the intelligence level, and they needed something that was just simple that would work without a great deal of maintenance. And the AK is that gun. Accuracy-wise, it's not that accurate. There's a short, what they call a short sight radius. The distance between the front and rear sight is quite short. The barrels are short. So, we're talking an intermediate distance of, 300 yards would be like by max on this without getting lucky. Of course, the sights go all the way up to 1,000 yards, and that's extremely optimistic. It fires, it's a gas-operated gun, and it fires from a closed bolt, obviously, lock breech. And they came with wood furniture, plastic furniture. Here is a later model one that I'm sure that you recognize. A lot of the Osama bin Laden was seen shooting a gun similar to this. This is called a Krinkoff short barrel, very short barrel one, underfolder. And this one is sheet metal, where the other one is block or milled steel. They all operate basically the same way. There's a selector that has safe, full auto, and semi-auto, and they're a pleasant gun to shoot because it shoots an intermediate-sized cartridge. It's a 7.62 by 39. In other words, the caliber 7.62 is basically 30 caliber, and 39 millimeters is the length of the case, compared to our 308, which is 7.62 by 51, which is a lot longer in the case. But we're going to shoot this one here, and we'll get set up and go. Okay, we're going to be shooting on full auto with this gun, and you'll notice that there's no muzzle brake on it, so you're going to see some significant flame. Magazine, we're going to rock it in. It goes toe heel. Going to charge it, and we're ready to go. Clear. You can see it has a little bit of recoil to it. It's quite loud, a little difficult to control on full auto, but again, probably the most recognizable assault weapon in the world.
Hi, I'm Mike Rogers from the Gun Store. It's time for the Moron of the Week segment. We try to show you people being unsafe so that you won't. Better ways to do things, seek good instruction.
Alright, I've been outside for the last 30 minutes showing my wife how to handle a gun, and I told her not to mess with it. And as you can see, she's not the best following directions, so just like she always does to me, tries to make fun of me. So now I'm going to get revenge, in the way any husband should. Good old leftover 4th of July. Now that is a husband's revenge.
You're an asshole.
Come on, baby.
There may be a better instructional technique for teaching safety than that, but I'll bet she never forgets. I wouldn't do that with my wife.
Quite often, my clients fall for something known as good cop, bad cop. As a criminal defense attorney, I'm always amazed when I read statements and I read investigative reports on my clients. Quite often, my clients fall for something known as good cop, bad cop. Anyone who's ever read a novel or seen a television show is familiar with good cop, bad cop. It is used, and it is a tactic that's taught. Understand that any officer who says things like, if you'll just tell me what really happened, I'll talk to the prosecutor for you, or it'll go easier if you talk to me. Well, it might go easier, and I'm sure that they'll talk to the prosecutor at some point if you're prosecuted. But they don't have any authority over whether you're prosecuted, what you're prosecuted for, or whether or not a prosecutor negotiates your case or goes all the way to a trial in an attempt to convict you. The police officers are simply trying to get a story, and if they don't believe the first thing you say, they're going to work very hard to get what they believe to be the truth. If an officer is being overly polite after one has just been somewhat pushy with you, understand it might be a ruse. Not necessarily, but quite possibly. Stand your ground. Invoke your rights to have an attorney present and to not speak to law enforcement until you've done that. That way you'll be protected from saying something in the heat of the moment that can be used against you later.
And we are back here on Fired Up. There is a growing trend in parts of the country, if you haven't noticed, that gangs of youths, teenagers generally, are playing a thing they generally call the knockout game. They will make absolutely brutal attacks on mostly older defensive people by running up behind them on a sidewalk or passing them on a sidewalk and punching them in the side of the head to see if they can knock them out with one punch. How amusing.
The game is being played now all over the country. It started kind of on the East Coast a little while ago. It got notoriety when some of these videos started going viral, but also when there were a couple of deaths. The essence of it is somebody points out an individual, usually older individual or somebody who's frail, and
Just point to Bob when he said older
and a kid runs up and punches them. Sometimes they're in packs, sometimes they're not, but in the end, the injuries are quite often horrific. A person is knocked out cold, they fall to the ground, they strike their head, then they're emotionally traumatized, and this is all in the form of fun.
It's really upsetting. And how does an older person or any person defend themselves? They don't see the attacker coming. It's, like you said, it's often from behind, or it's completely, they're not in the know about this. No one's expecting to just be blindsided and attacked. And it's really unfortunate because there's no way for them to be prepared for something like this. It's very upsetting.
Well, the thing that bothers me is that the media latches onto this somehow because these jerks are using their phones to record their antics, and they post it on YouTube. They send it to their buddies so that they can show how brave they are attacking some 80-year-old woman.
This is a much more serious problem than anybody's given credence to. This is a societal problem. This really demonstrates the worst of what our society is capable of doing. I mean, when you take a punk that will intentionally try and hurt an older person because it amuses them and it amuses their friends, I don't think that there's enough punishment that we could do to them. The only smile I got out of reading all these stories is the guy that didn't do the knockout game so good, and he went up against a guy with a CCW who shot and killed him. Now that is a happy ending.
The reason I brought this story into it, because this is not a directly gun-related story, but we teach here a lot of self-defense classes, and we work with people all the time on how to defend themselves. And what I'm seeing here, I don't see an immediate solution for. Mostly the victims are in their 70s or thereabouts. They're quietly walking home from the market or wherever with their bag of stuff, and these kids will come up behind them and just sock them in the side of the head and literally knock them into next week. They'll usually knock them out. Several of them had been killed. And we're trying to find through the instructors that we have here a way to instruct people to defend themselves against this. And it's almost impossible with the age of the people. They can't see well, they don't hear well, most of them, and they're being blindsided by these 16-year-olds. I don't know how you tell somebody to defend themselves. You tell an 80-year-old lady to pay attention.
But you do. That's the problem with this, is we've gotten into a place in society where, by and large, we've lost situational awareness. We don't think tactically all the time. I know, Randy, all of us that were cops, when you were an officer, you spent all your time looking at things and making judgments and saying, oh, I'm not going to walk over there because that's a dangerous area, or I'm not going to go down that street because this and that. We lose that over time. We lose that when we get complacent and comfortable. And by and large, these individuals are out of general public view. This isn't happening in Times Square. It's happening where they allow themselves to be complacent, not pay attention to what's going on around them. Could an 80-year-old individual effectively defend themselves? Maybe not, but if they saw the problem and made noise or started filming the individuals with their own phone as they're walking along. I was walking downtown a few weeks ago. I had to be downtown after dark, and I was walking across Fremont Street back to where I'd parked my car, and I was with somebody, and we're walking along, and I crossed over and walked on the other side of the street, and we kept walking, and then we kind of dodged around some other stuff, and eventually he said, why aren't we walking in a straight line? I said, well, there's some things I didn't want to walk immediately past over there, and we'll leave it at that. He had no clue that right around the corner there was a large group of individuals in a dark corner. I didn't know if they were good or bad.
Well,
I didn't want to find out the hard way.
We all naturally do risk assessment. You know, we have to be aware of something around us, and so subconsciously, when we see something that we perceive as a possible threat, then we can take at least some type of action. Many of these victims, though, are helpless people.
Well, this is where you hit, I think, a nail on the head in some sense, identifying our societal problem that we have. And I think it's our obligation somehow to publicize this to the degree that we call upon the better part of our society to start watching out for the older, elder, and vulnerable people. Not just older people, but vulnerable people who are taken advantage of. And perhaps it could even lead to legislation that would minimize the civil liability that one would be looking at when you're coming to the aid of another.
No, I agree. I agree with that. But everybody's a potential victim. 4 days ago, I was accosted in a parking lot of a grocery store, and it was only because I knew how to defend myself that the incident didn't escalate to something worse than the guy getting his butt kicked. But everyone is a potential victim every time that we are out in public.
There's another problem that's going on here, and it's the harder one to control, because we can tell people be more aware. We can say carry pepper spray, carry a stun device, carry a firearm if it's legal and you can. The problem is, why is a segment of our society, primarily young males, drawn to this kind of behavior? And that's ingrained somewhere. An individual I was interacting with in a chat forum the other day actually proposed that this is going on, and it's the same example as Native American braves counting coup. It proves how brave. They did it in order to prove either you rode up alongside a buffalo and touched it, or touched an enemy, or stole a horse from within their encampment, or something like that. historically. And he feels that this is the same thing that's going on. This is a way for a certain segment of society to prove they're brave, and they think it's less damaging than other forms like a drive-by shooting or something along those lines.
You know what? All that is taking a behavior and trying to label it some politically correct kind of crime.
It's a rite of passage.
I
That's what it is.
I don't think he was being politically correct. I think he effectively pointed to something. There is a large enough group of individuals that believe this is appropriate. I don't know if it's the right word, but at least acceptable to do to prove something to themselves.
That is the most frightening aspect of this whole thing.
Yeah. So how do we control that? That's the hard part. How do we control that? And
we publicize the guys that end their miserable existences with their firearms, like that guy that did with the one knockout game.
We start looking out for each other, and we take them on. That's all.
Seems to be the best suggestion we're coming up with is to pay attention ourselves.
Well, and I would
to see if everybody out there, to see if we can step in and walk the old lady down the street, you know, rather than watch her walk away.
Those who get caught doing this, and I'm a defense attorney, this tears me up to say this, and Alan knows where I'm going with this. I hope those who are found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of this kind of behavior,
execution,
suffer severe consequences, up to and including, I mean, if somebody dies from this,
really good with execution.
Would this be a premeditated murder if somebody died from a reasonable, like, the action that they reasonably took?
It would be. Even though they're a juvenile, but in, a 16-year-old in this state, we can put them away.
Maybe they're 18 or 19. I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't some older individuals taking part in this to get their youthful endeavor back.
There was just one with the guys who were in their 30s.
Yeah. It's not necessarily just kids. That's where it started.
Well, that's about it for this episode. I appreciate you tuning in. We need to start watching out for each other out there in the street, and that's a great suggestion, Alan. I think that we pay attention ourselves to the people that don't and go walk alongside them and help them. Absolutely. Make the bad guys stay away from them. We'll be back next week, same time, same station. We'll be looking for you then.